the Galapagos Islands. I met with these birds wherever there were lakes of brine. I saw them here wading about in search of food, probably for the worms which burrow in the mud, and these latter probably feed on infusoria or confervae. Thus we have a little living world within itself, adapted to these inland lakes of brine. A minute crustaceous animal, Cancer salinus, is said to live in countless numbers in the brine pans at Lymington, but only in those in which the fluid has attained, from evaporation, considerable strength, namely, about a quarter of a pound of salt to a pint of water. It is remarkable how all the circumstances connected with the salt lakes in Siberia and Patagonia are similar. Siberia, like Patagonia, appears to have recently elevated above the waters of the sea. In both countries, the salt lakes occupy shallow depressions in the plains. In both, the mud on the borders is black and fetid. Beneath the crust of common salt, sulphate of soda or of magnesium occurs, imperfectly crystallized, and in both the muddy sand is mixed with lintels of gypsum. The Siberian salt lakes are inhabited by small crustaceous animals, and flamingos likewise frequent them. As these circumstances, apparently so trifling, occur in two distant continents, we may feel sure that they are the necessary results of a common cause. See Pallas's Travels, 1793 to 1794, pages 129 to 134. Well may we affirm that every part of the world is habitable. Whether lakes of brine, or those subterranean ones hidden beneath volcanic mountains, warm mineral springs, the wide expanse and depths of the ocean, the upper regions of the atmosphere, and even the surface of perpetual snow, all support organic beings. To the northward of the Rio Negro, between it and the inhabited country near Buenos Aires, the Spaniards have only one small settlement, recently established at Bahia Blanca. The distance in a straight line to Buenos Aires is very nearly 500 British miles. The wandering tribes of horse Indians, which have always occupied the greater part of this country, having of late much harassed the outlying estancias, the government at Buenos Aires equipped some time since an army under the command of General Rosas, for the purpose of exterminating them. The troops were now encamped on the banks of the Colorado, a river lying about 80 miles northward of the Rio Negro. When General Rosas left Buenos Aires, he struck in a direct line across the unexplored plains, and as the country was thus pretty well cleared of Indians, he left behind him, at wide intervals, a small party of soldiers with a troop of horses, a posta, so as to be enabled to keep up a communication with the capital. As the Beagle intended to call at Bahia Blanca, I determined to proceed there by land, and ultimately I extended my plan to travel the whole way by the postas to Buenos Aires. August 11th. Mr. Harris, an Englishman residing at Patagones, a guide, and 5 gauchos, who were proceeding to the army on business, were my companions on the journey. The Colorado, as I have already said, is nearly 80 miles distant, and as we travelled slowly, we were 2 days and a half on the road. The whole line of country deserves scarcely a better name than that of a desert. Water is found only in 2 small wells. It is called fresh, but even at this time of year, during the rainy season, it was quite brackish. In the summer this must be a distressing passage, for now it was sufficiently desolate. The valley of the Rio Negro, broad as it is, has merely been excavated out of the sandstone plain, for immediately above the bank on which the town stands, a level country commences, which is interrupted only by a few trifling valleys and depressions. Everywhere the landscape wears the same sterile aspect. A dry gravelly soil supports tufts of brown withered grass, and low scattered bushes, armed with thorns. Shortly after passing the first spring we came in sight of a famous tree, which the Indians reverence as the altar of Walleechu. It is situated on a high part of the plain, and hence is a landmark visible at a great distance. As soon as a tribe of Indians come in sight of it, they offer their adorations by loud shouts. The tree itself is low, much branched, and thorny. Just above the root it has a diameter of about 3 feet. It stands by itself, without any neighbour, and was indeed the first tree we saw. Afterwards we met with a few others of the same kind, but they were far from common. Being winter, the tree had no leaves, but in their place numberless threads, by which the various offerings, such as cigars, bread, meat, pieces of cloth, etc., had been suspended. Poor Indians, not having anything better, only pull a thread out of their ponchos and fasten it to the tree. Richer Indians are accustomed to pour spirits and mate into a certain hole, and likewise to smoke upwards, thinking thus to afford all possible gratification to Walichu. To complete the scene, the tree was surrounded by the bleached bones of horses which had been slaughtered as sacrifices. All Indians of every age and sex make their offerings. They then think that their horses will not tire, and that they themselves shall be prosperous. The gaucho who told me this said that in the time of peace he had witnessed this scene, and that he and others used to wait till the Indians had passed by, for the sake of stealing from Walichu the offerings. The gauchos think that the Indians consider the tree as the god itself, but it seems far more probable that they regard it as the altar. The only cause which I can imagine for this choice is its being a landmark in a dangerous passage. The Sierra de la Ventana is visible at an immense distance, and a gaucho told me that he was once riding with an Indian a few miles to the north of the Rio Colorado, when the Indian commenced making the same loud noise which is usual at the first sight of the distant tree, putting his hand to his head, and then pointing in the direction of the Sierra. Upon being asked the reason of this, the Indian said, in broken Spanish, "First see the Sierra." About 2 leagues beyond this curious tree we halted for the night. At this instant an unfortunate cow was spied by the lynx-eyed gauchos, who set off in full chase, and in a few minutes dragged her in with their lazos, and slaughtered her. We here had the 4 necessities of life in el campo: pasture for the horses, water, only a muddy puddle, meat, and firewood. The gauchos were in high spirits at finding all these luxuries, and we soon set to work at the poor cow. This was the first night which I passed under the open sky, with the gear of the recado for my bed. There is high enjoyment in the independence of the gaucho life, to be able at any moment to pull up your horse and say, "Here we will pass the night." The death-like stillness of the plain, the dogs keeping watch, the gypsy group of gauchos making their beds round the fire, have left in my mind a strongly marked picture of this first night, which will never be forgotten. The next day the country continued similar to that above described. It is inhabited by few birds or animals of any kind. Occasionally a deer or a guanaco (wild llama) may be seen, but the agouti (Cavia patagonia) is the commonest quadruped. This animal here represents our hares. It differs, however, from that genus in many essential respects. For instance, it only has 3 toes behind. It is also nearly twice the size, weighing from 20 to 25 pounds. The agouti is a true friend of the desert. It is a common feature of the landscape to see 2 or 3 hopping quickly one after the other in a straight line across these wild plains. They are found as far north as the Sierra Tapalgane, latitude 37 degrees 30, where the plain rather suddenly becomes greener and more humid, and their southern limit is between Port Desire and St. Julian, where there is no change in the nature of the country. It is a singular fact, that although the agouti is not now found as far south as Port St. Julian, yet that Captain Wood, in his voyage in 1670, talks of them as being numerous there. What cause can have altered, in a wide, uninhabited, and rarely visited country, the range of an animal like this? It appears also, from the number shot by Captain Wood in one day at Port Desire, that they must have been considerably more abundant there formerly than at present. Where the bizcacha lives and makes its burrows, the agouti uses them; but where, as at Bahia Blanca, the bizcacha is not found, the agouti burrows for itself. The same thing occurs with the little owl of the Pampas, Athene cunicularia, which has so often been described as standing like a sentinel at the mouth of the burrows; for in Banda Oriental, owing to the absence of the bizcacha, it is obliged to hollow out its own habitation. The next morning, as we approached the Rio Colorado, the appearance of the country changed. We soon came on a plain covered with turf, which from its flowers, tall clover, and little owls, resembled the Pampas,